The year was 1947, a year that would forever change the course of history for the Indian subcontinent. The British Empire, once a behemoth straddling the globe, felt its grip weaken. The sun was setting on an empire that had prided itself on its vast dominions. Decades of ruthless exploitation had left India, the jewel in its crown, yearning for freedom. The people of India had endured immense suffering, their resources drained, their spirits tested. This wasn't just a transfer of power, it was a reckoning, a moment of truth that would lay bare the consequences of colonial rule, a blood-soaked birth of two nations. The partition of India and Pakistan was marked by unprecedented violence and mass displacement. The air crackled with anticipation, thick with the stench of fear and uncertainty. Families were torn apart, homes abandoned, and lives uprooted. Millions dreamt of a brighter future, yet shadows of doubt lingered. The promise of independence was tainted by the reality of division. Could unity prevail amidst the growing chasm between Hindus and Muslims? The communal tensions that had simmered for years now threatened to boil over. This is the story of how a dream of independence became a nightmare of division, a tale of hope turned into despair, of unity shattered by discord, a tale of ambition, ideology, and the perilous dance between peace and chaos. Leaders on both sides grappled with the enormity of the task before them. This is the story of India's partition, a story that continues to haunt the collective memory of the subcontinent. The seeds of discord were sown long ago. The British, with their policy of divide and rule, had set the stage for the eventual partition. The British, masters of divide and rule, had skillfully exploited religious and cultural differences. They had pitted communities against each other to maintain their control. They had favored one community over the other, creating resentment and mistrust. This favoritism bred animosity that would later erupt into violence. As the struggle for independence gained momentum, these fault lines deepened, threatening to erupt. The fight for freedom was marred by internal strife, as the dream of a united India began to crumble. Leaders from both sides met to negotiate the terms of partition, but the process was fraught with tension and mistrust. The decisions made in those fateful meetings would shape the future of millions. As the borders were drawn, millions were forced to flee their homes. The largest mass migration in human history ensued, with people moving across newly formed borders in search of safety. The aftermath of partition left deep scars. Families were separated, communities torn apart, and the land itself bore the wounds of division. The legacy of partition is one of pain and loss, but also of resilience and hope for a better future. By the early 20th century, India was a cauldron of unrest. The simmering discontent among the masses was palpable, and the air was thick with the whispers of rebellion. The British Raj, which had once seemed invincible, now faced a growing tide of resistance. World War I had exposed the vulnerability of the empire. The war had drained British resources and weakened its grip on its colonies. The once mighty British Empire was now showing cracks in its armor. Young Indians, returning from battlefields across Europe, felt betrayed. They had fought valiantly for the British cause, hoping for recognition and better treatment upon their return. Instead, they were met with the harsh reality of continued subjugation and discrimination. They had fought for the British, yet their own land remained enslaved. Nationalist sentiments surged. The frustration and anger among the Indian populace grew, fueling the fire of the independence movement. The Indian National Congress, formed in 1885, grew bolder in its demands for self-rule. Initially, it was a platform for moderate voices seeking gradual reform and greater representation within the British framework. Initially, it sought dominion status within the empire. The idea was to achieve a status similar to that of Canada or Australia, where India would have self-governance but remain under the British Crown. But the appetite for complete independence grew stronger with each passing year. The moderate approach began to lose its appeal as the British continued to ignore the legitimate aspirations of the Indian people. The INC was a diverse group, encompassing a spectrum of ideologies. From moderates to radicals, the Congress was a melting pot of ideas and strategies, each faction contributing to the larger goal of freedom. There were moderates who believed in gradual reform and cooperation with the British. They argued that working within the system would eventually lead to self-governance. Others advocated for complete independence, even if it meant resorting to force. These radicals were impatient and disillusioned with the slow pace of change, believing that only a decisive break from British rule would bring true freedom. This internal struggle would shape India's destiny. The clash of ideologies within the Congress was not just a battle of ideas, but a reflection of the broader struggle for India's soul. The path to independence was fraught with challenges, but it was this very diversity of thought that would eventually lead India to its tryst with destiny. From this maelstrom of conflicting visions emerged three towering figures: Jawaharlal Nehru, the pragmatic idealist; Mahatma Gandhi, the apostle of peace; and Mohammad Ali Jinnah, the shrewd lawyer who would become the voice of Muslim separatism. These men, each a giant in his own right, would become inextricably linked with India's destiny. Their paths, once aligned in the quest for freedom, would tragically diverge, leading to one of the greatest upheavals in human history. Initially, they shared a common goal: the liberation of India from British rule. They believed in a united India, where Hindus and Muslims could coexist as equals. But as the struggle for independence intensified, so did the fissures within the movement.
Jawaharlal Nehru, a product of both East and West, embodied the aspirations of a new India. Born into a prominent family, Nehru was exposed to both Indian traditions and Western education, which shaped his worldview and his vision for the country. Educated at Harrow and Cambridge, he was a staunch believer in democracy, secularism, and industrialization. His time in England not only provided him with a top-tier education, but also exposed him to the ideas of liberalism and socialism, which deeply influenced his political ideology. He envisioned an India that could stand tall on the world stage, free from the shackles of colonialism and poverty. Nehru's dream was to see India as a self-reliant nation, capable of making its own decisions and charting its own course in the global arena. Joining the INC, Nehru quickly rose through the ranks, his charisma and progressive views resonating with the younger generation. His speeches and writings inspired many to join the freedom struggle, and he became a symbol of hope and change for the youth of the nation. He became a close confidant of Gandhi, acting as a bridge between the Mahatma's idealism and the realities of political maneuvering. Nehru's ability to balance Gandhi's spiritual approach with practical politics was crucial in the fight for independence. Nehru's vision for India was ambitious. He saw the country as a modern, industrialized nation with a strong emphasis on science and technology. His plans included building infrastructure, promoting education, and fostering scientific research. He advocated for a strong central government, rapid industrialization, and a scientific temper. Nehru believed that a centralized authority was necessary to implement his vision and drive the country towards progress and development. He believed in a state that could uplift the masses from poverty and ignorance. Nehru's policies aimed at reducing economic disparities and providing equal opportunities for all citizens, regardless of their background. His ideas, though sometimes clashing with Gandhi's spiritual and traditional outlook, would lay the foundation for modern India. Nehru's emphasis on modernization and industrial growth often contrasted with Gandhi's focus on rural development and self-sufficiency. But together, their combined efforts steered the nation towards independence and beyond.